So in my last video, one of the things I mentioned being needed for Final Fantasy XIV to be better is to address the underlying rot present in many of its systems. It sounds dramatic, but the game has been a case of asymptomatic sepsis for several years now. As of 7.0, the player base has been able to notice it more than ever. The last video was kind of long, so I will try to cut my thoughts up into shorter, easier to digest bits at a time. But in short, the current patch cycle model is slowly throttling the game and needs to be adjusted or changed entirely. I figured I might as well start with one of the least critical issues, while also getting one of the most painful subjects out of the way. As you will hear me note way too often, I've been playing this game since the beginning. I get to wave my cane about the bad old days, but in this context, I was here when housing released. Because I'm a fucking baller and it was not an integral system in the game, I was able to buy a large house in all 3 of the initial housing districts at a plot of my choosing with literally no competition. Eventually, I bought 2 more smalls and plots I enjoyed just for the fun of it. It did not take long for the shine to dull for me, and instead my fun came from flipping all but my favorite plot when it became apparent that houses were becoming scarce and kind of mean to hold on to. Weird flex, I know, but at the time the developers were busy putting more weight on the free company aspect of the game than they reasonably should have, likely not expecting the game to explode as much and as quickly as it did. What was originally just a cute bit of side content and raising chocobos, growing plants, having an airship or submarine, or using the Aether Wheel, became a content wall that to date still cannot really be interacted with outside of housing for some reason. For the most part, I think the solution is obvious. They need to disconnect these auxiliary and optional systems from the free company directly, and luckily they already have a place for them to go instead, with the grand company still being a thing. Connect these features to the rank system in the GCs and allow them to be accessible from the Forgotten Squadron. The other half of my solution is both a hot take and something far more people will resist, but I'm still gonna say it. I feel like the housing districts need to be destroyed, or at the bare minimum turned into legacy content. It's been long enough now that I think we can all agree to an extent that the gambling housing roulette, while technically more fair and less unhealthy than the house dueling of old, is really stupid and extra dumb. The main problem is that it establishes a norm that there will never be enough houses to go around, while also basically terrifying people into paying fucking rent to keep it. Again, under a toxic notion of fairness. A lot of people now ravenously do not just go for a house in a specific region because they want them, but because that is their only option to get a house at all. I don't really care who disagrees, but Island Sanctuary feels like a prototype to better housing, even if the developers went out of their way to say otherwise. Ignoring that they were on the same servers as housing, they have a basically non-functional version of many systems that already existed in housing. You can farm, raise animals, upgrade your buildings, furnish the outside and only the outside. You've just got to sacrifice a bit of your time in return. The immediate answer is just to finish the jump and make island sanctuaries into full housing. But because that answer is so obvious, I would instead like to jump into the fantastical for my real proposed solution. Let us put our housing instance in any of the zones from a designated entry point. I don't want to go through the spiel explaining why the neighborhoods of the original housing do not work anymore from a functional and immersion perspective. I want you to engage with me on this fantasy. Some people want to live in Ul'dah, or one of the other cities. Wouldn't that be nice? Ultima Thule is a whole vibe. Wouldn't you like a house in space? I know it's difficult for some of us, but for just a few moments, let us disengage from how much trouble it would cause the developers and instead think of how much better this one little idea could be. You can't hate lucky players for winning the house in Cactpot. They could take it a step further and even let us make our own neighborhoods and districts with our friends or free companies. They could expand houses to be more than the 3 configurations we already have. If you think this is impossible for them to do, please tell me why, because Island Sanctuary exists, and we're getting another version of it, so tell me why this can't be our tried and true housing future. Now, let's unfortunately snap back to reality. I have more to say on this subject, but it's honestly kind of circular. All I have left for now is that I think we should just jump to obliterating current housing. It's got so much value right now only because it's limited and difficult to acquire. It's a meme that housing is the true endgame, but the likelihood of actually being able to interact with the system is so low, especially if you aren't voraciously watching for openings. It's just unfortunate. A bad, dated system all around that needs much more than just adding more houses. There are too many people. You can't be doing this roulette shit and thinking it'll work itself out. People pay the same sub, let them access all of the content you made for them. Anyway, housing isn't a deal breaker or a game breaker. It's just got so many of its own issues. There are many more rotting systems to talk about though, so let's keep going.
Psych!